Verbal Pick Radio, where we give you a verbal image of life, and we are everyday people. Like to welcome you all to the show. We want to finish up dealing with the Black History, heading into Black History Month, but we're on Portugal because Portugal was first. If you listen to the past shows where I talk about Ganga, Zumba, and Portuguese, we're on that because a lot of people think that after 1492, when Spain defeated the Moors, and Columbus was sailing to Americas, actually looking for a new homeland, in a sense, for Jews. He had some Moors on the ship with him as well. And because the Moors was defeated, and when Queen Ferdinand and Isabella, they kicked the Moors and the Jews out of Spain at that time when the Moors was defeated, because in Spain, the Moors and the Jews were friends. And so, they was expelled. And a lot of people think, okay, now slavery is getting underway. 1611 King James Bible, some say 1619, is when King James, which was Jamestown, Virginia, saying that, they arrived in Virginia. And that's all true, but that was in North America, right? But we all know what happened in North, Central, and South America with the indigenous black people that were put into bondage. Now, in 1249 is when Portugal defeated the Moors, right? 1492 is when Spain won their so-called independence from the Moors. Now, they have a statue called the Reconquista, Reconquista, right? It's Spanish. I'm not fluent in Spanish. But they have a statue showing a Portugal soldier with a sword in his hand holding up the head of a Moor, as though he had decapitated the Moor in honor of them defeating the Moors in 1249. Now, once they defeated the Moors in 1249, they took them as prisoners, right? Then they started working them as prisoners, and then actually bringing them into a fold into the new government of Portugal after the Moors was defeated. Then the Portuguese started going back to North Africa, creating wars. But the whole purpose of those wars were so they can capture more slaves. That's when they start getting into the slave business, because, for one, you will hear a lot of the white Portuguese today. You go to Portugal, they'll show you Algarve, they'll show, which means the West in Arabic, but they'll show you different sites of castles and things that the Moors constructed in their city that they marvel over, because they didn't create it, they didn't build it. They take credit and claim for it, and they like to show it off, because the things that the Moors built is the number one tourist attraction in Portugal. But it wasn't built by them, it was built by the Moors, right? So anyway, when they took the Moors into slavery or prisoners of war, they worked them as slaves. They picked their minds, and as far as the education, the books, the medicine, and whatnot. And so the quote unquote colonizer Portuguese, or the white Portuguese, started utilizing the knowledge and the workings and the buildings of the Moors. So then they said, well, you know what? We can even get into this slave business even more, but we need to find a way to extract more slaves or more Moors. That's what they really was looking for, Moors. More Moors. So they went to North Africa, creating little wars, kidnapping black people, bringing them back to Portugal as slaves, and then they would travel from Portuguese all the way to Japan, around the world with their slaves or their captive prisoners, which was the Moors. But albeit that they had to respect the knowledge of the Moors, the information that the Moors carried. So at first they wasn't brutal. It's like, how can I put it? It's like when you wanna. It's like when you know your destination and you know what you like the outcome to be, but you can't let them be aware of your plans. So you string them along with kindness and until you learn everything about them, until you feel comfortable enough to where you can take the whole thing over and you can run it yourself. But at first you can't run it yourself because you don't know all the makings of it. But what they always fail to realize is that you think you know all of it, but the people will never give you all of it. That's why they only give you enough to where what you're seeking to do will only last for a period of time. Then after that, you'll exhaust your wisdom. You don't know how to run it. They didn't give you everything, and they're not going to give you everything. So that's why you're seeing the turmoil in the world in the shape that it is. But with all that saying, sometimes people need an amen. They need some verification. They need someone else to speak upon the subject. And it's a shame, and we're going into black history, that a lot of black people don't believe it unless it's coming from the mouth of a white person. So we'll put that on display for you as well, just so you can say
sails, so that they can move very quickly in favorable winds, but also still have control and tack into the wind. And you really needed a caravel like this for these long voyages down the coast of Africa, because if you were going to go those long distances and then return, you were likely to have opposite wind conditions when you went down as compared to when you came back. So these long loop voyages into these unknown territories required a ship like the caravel. Over time, these Portuguese voyages, even more than learning and charting the coast of Africa, more importantly, they learned and began to map the wind and sea currents of the Atlantic. Okay, and they began to figure out that if you simply used the wind to move you as quickly as possible, you could travel closely along the coast of Africa. Then when you were done and wanted to turn back, you could sail out into the open Atlantic and catch the sea currents and wind currents moving the other way. They would catch the North Atlantic drift, or the Gulf Stream, as Americans would call it, and use that to loop back and then over back to Portugal. Okay, so they really became the first long-distance open ocean seafarers. Okay, they would go hundreds, even 1,000 miles away from land, knowing that there were the right currents to carry them back at the right time. And this process of looping out far into the ocean was called the volta do mar. Okay, the Portuguese phrase volta do mar, or return or loop of the sea. So by about 1450, these voyages had managed to get down pretty much down to what we would call Senegal and the Gambia in that area. They began trading more directly for gold closer to the source, in which the sources were further down in Ghana, in that area, or what we would now call Ghana. So they had reached as far down as Senegal. They traded for gold, other African goods, bringing textiles, wine, firearms, things like this. they also began acquiring slaves. So early on, beginning in 1444, some of these Portuguese voyages actually sent away teams into the mainland to basically capture people, fight small battles and skirmishes, take prisoners, and bring them back to Portugal to sell as slaves. This, not surprisingly, was a very, disturbing, upsetting process to a lot of the people who took part in it and to many of the people in Portugal who witnessed the sale of these slaves. So, partly as a response to this, the Portuguese government and Prince Henry changed their policy, and these voyages started to instead buy captives that were already held in captivity in many of the African cities along the Upper Guinea coast. So there might be debtor slaves, prisoners of war, people who were held captive for whatever reason, and the Portuguese began buying some of these captives, bringing them back to Portugal, and thus spurring on a growing slave trade in Africa. So this was the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade.
That was the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade. Now, let me characterize this for you all. 1249, Portuguese defeats the Moors. So 190 years, just about, the offspring of the Moors are living in Portugal. Because you got to remember when the Moors was ruling over Portugal, and you got to remember the white people of Portugal were really the Visigoths who was coming up out of deep Europe. Okay, the Moors sleeping with the women, they having offspring, having children, whatever. So but they were conquerors. So when the Moors got defeated in Portugal, the offspring of the Moors still knew how to navigate because the Moors was the number one navigators because they traveled throughout the globe. The Moors was defeating Italy, Spain, Portugal. They was all up in Europe. So that's the only thing when white people tell history, and it's not to put a blight on white people. Because that's why it's called history. When you are the ruling class, then you get to tell history the way you see fit. But when you say how you try to say that, you try to give credit to the Portuguese for figuring out a way to sell from Portugal to Africa, and the Portuguese did sell to Japan, as you saw in a earlier show I did on Nanban, but they did. But it's not the fact that they just was so brilliant and they got together and figured out a way to do it, how to set sails. No, the Moors was guiding them, was teaching them how to travel to get to these destinations. So once they learned, and coming up in 1444, that's where you get your 444. You be hearing people 444, 444, 444. That's when it really jumped off, going into Africa, finding ways to extract black people out of Africa into that harsh slavery. Now, you heard him say that the Portuguese started buying prisoners of war or people that was in debt, because you would hear the story say, well, Africans sold their own into slavery. Let me explain that real quick. That's like saying a friend that I know, his second cousin stole from me. I find out, I tell him, look, to replace the value of what you've taken from me, you're going to have to come work for me for 3 months. Right. But within them 3 months, he's working. He still can go home. He still has freedom, meaning he's not getting beaten his back. When he returns home, he's going to look the same as when he left. He not going to be maimed, Part of his foot not going to be chopped off. He's not going to have a whole bunch of whips on his back. And that's how the nature or the character of the tribal tradition was in those times. So when the Portuguese, along with their Moorish counterparts who traveled with them, because they didn't leave without, everywhere they went, they had the Moors with them. The Africans was like, oh, you want to buy, because they never heard of it. You want to give me value for a prisoner of war? Yeah, okay, yeah, hey, take them. You can take them off my hand because that would be cheaper than us feeding them and whatnot. That's fine, yeah. You want to buy a person that was in debt and you gonna pay money for them? Okay, well that's fine. But lo and behold, if they knew the atrocities and the danger and the killings and the total brutality of their people at the hands of the colonizer, they would never would have agreed to it. So stop telling these stories like, well, the African chiefs sold their own into slavery. Nah, they sold prisoners of war, and they think because they was thinking that it was universal of how you would treat indentured servants. But what the colonizers and the Portuguese did was something totally new on how you would treat human beings. So that's what that was about. And so the Portuguese started it, kicked off the Atlantic slave trade before Columbus came, because the Portuguese was traveling to Brazil in the 1400s with their slaves. So we just wanted to put that information out heading into this Black History Month, because we're tracking this thing. Because next time when we're on this subject, now we're moving on into Spain, because Spain, like I said, didn't defeat the Moors at Granada until 1492. But the Portuguese defeated them in 1249. Right, so they had a leg up because they learned, they sucking up all the information and knowledge from these Moors when they defeated them. I mean, they was brutal, So, but we got to that's Black history, You got to start the root knowledge, but we don't want, meaning we don't want the narrative to get twisted. We don't want lies to overshadow the truth. Let's put it like that. Because that is very important, because reason why it's important, you got Black folks in North America, Central America, South America, who this whole slavery business, which was a business, had a mental and psychological effect upon Black people from the continent of Africa to Brazil, to Spain, to Portugal, to North America, right? Because families was displaced, traditions was lost, religions was lost, mores and history and what was passed down from generation to generations, skills, what family was known for, what skill that they carried, and they passed that on from generation. All of that was just tore up and lost. And then you had in North America, where you wanted to further that and not allow slaves to have the God-given right to know, read or write. All of that is part of it, So we'll continue to carry on into the this topic and next on our next shows and what we're doing. This is Vero Pick Radio, and we're out.